Hello, everybody, and welcome to our lecture on Germany and the world in the 1920s. Uh, and so we're going back in time right now. We just did our whole Russian Rev unit. We went all the way up until the late 30s with Stalin. And so we're going back to right at the end of the war, going right after the shooting ended, right after the armistice is signed and the treaty is getting done. And so we're going back here. Now, this unit as a whole, we call it the interwar years, or the between war years. But at the time, it's really important to remember that this was just the post-war years. World War II was not inevitable now. It's not just this decade-long time building up towards World War II. Uh, we're going to learn a lot about missed opportunities and opportunities for a maintained peace. Right now, World War II isn't in the minds of many people in Europe. Right now, Europe is trying to recover and figure out their new realities. So again, this unit is not a setup for World War II. Think of it more as missed opportunities for a lasting peace. And so if we look at where we are, post-war Europe and Germany, we talk about the lost generation. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper, from T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men. He was a member of the lost generation. He was one of these people who came of age during World War I and is just questioning everything. Next, I want you to take a moment with your partner and talk about the territorial changes that happened after World War I. We talked about these a while ago when we did the stations, but I know it's been a long Russian Revolution and Corona break 2020, woo, where we want to just remind ourselves of these. So take a look at these. And as I said, talk with your partner. You probably don't have somebody to talk it about, so just remind yourself what you're looking at here. By the way, since we're not going to be able to have a lot of these conversations, I would really suggest being extra aggressive with your pen, writing things down, jotting down questions. So if you have them, you can put them in the doc. We can type to them when we have that discussion time, okay? So next we are going to look at this political cartoon. So the world's feelings after World War I. What point is the artist trying to get across? Make sure you read what's on the hat and what's going on here. So go ahead and take a look at that one. I mean, so basically, the world is going through. Did you stop? Because I'm not going to tell the answer if you didn't stop. Now, it's an American cartoon, so it has Mexico and Costa Rica, but that wouldn't have been a concern for Europe. But it's kind of like a war hangover. It's got a pounding headache. Workers are angry. Bolshevism's on the rise. Terrorism. There's a lot of scary things going on. We looked at this cartoon when we talked about the causes of war, when you looked at the historiography. And the question I want you to really think about is, why is blame and responsibility for the war, for who killed the peace of Europe up here? Why is that important? Why is that an important question? So go ahead with that. I'm not going to tell you. Did you do it? Okay. Because the next image we're going to look at is total expenditures for the war. This comes out to be about $55 billion in modern day money. What impact is this going to have? What is this going to do? Sorry, that's just for Germany, by the way. The billion that I said, the $55 billion for just Germany. So what impact is this going to have on post-war feelings, on post-war anxiety? What is this going to do to countries? What is this going to do internally, externally? Again, this is just money spent, so think of how much debt these places are in. Okay. Next, I want to look at German revolutions in 1918. Now, this is crazy. Your reading talked about how there were revolutions towards the end of World War I. And I just want to make sure you can see this part here. So the red is revolutions, the 5th and 6th of November. The purple is the 7th and 8th. These are little revolutions. These are rebellions. These are uprisings. These are Soviet councils meeting. On the 9th is the blue. On the 10th is the green. So these are all happening within a week. Now keep in mind, they asked for the armistice on the 11th. So this is all of the things that are going on in Germany in this last week of the war. So this is just absolutely insane is what I was trying to say. And sorry, I don't think you could see the key down there because I think the camera spot was in the way, but I don't think there's anything I can do about that once I started. So anyway, so in those closing weeks of the war, the Emperor and High Command stepped down because they didn't want to face the humiliation of surrendering, of giving up. The Kaiser actually left at the end of October. So the Social Democrats are left in power. And they are moderate socialists. They're not radicals. They're not Bolsheviks at all. And they create a National Assembly to draw up a constitution and run elections for a new Reichstag. Think of them as a provisional government. And to be honest, the Social Democrats were more fearful of a left uprising than a return of the right. Think about that for a second. Process. They're more fearful of a left uprising than a return of the right. So who are they not afraid is going to come back right now? Correct, the Kaiser and them. All right, and it turns out they were very right to have this fear because then we get the Spartacist Revolt in January of 1919. So this is very shortly after all the war, the armistice is called. So if you know who Spartacus was, this famous movie made after him with Douglas, Kirk Douglas, excuse me. Spartacus was the only successful slave rebellion in Rome's history. Who is Spartacus? I am Spartacus. You can check out the YouTube if you want. But anyway, what the Spartacist Revolt is, it was an attempted proletariat revolution in Germany. So this is a Bolshevik, this is a Marxist, this really is the real deal. And for a little while, it seems like it was actually going to be successful. But it was violently put down by the provisional government. And it actually left a lot of people resentful the way they put it down. Well, would you look at that? I just learned that I could move the thing. I did that so you could read this here about Rosa Luxemburg. This is a great example of women in politics. She's also a phenomenal source to have, somebody to know, because the College Board loves her. She's a female Marxist politician who is active. So take a moment and read this, and then we'll move on. This is kind of fun. Now you just never know where I'm going to be. So this is a propaganda poster that was put out by the KPD, which there's a hint on the last slide who that is. And this is saying, what does Spartacus want, is basically what that's translating to in German. So take a moment and think about the point of view of the artist. What is this guy doing and who is he doing it to? So go ahead and take a moment with that. Oh, are you back already? Oh, very good. Just getting a little reading in here. The German Genius by Peter Watson. This is Spartacus, and he's already struck down the Kaiser. He's striking down militarism, capitalism, Junkerism. And this is the Communist Party of Deutschland, if you were able to figure that out. All right, so we're looking at the government. We're looking at the National Assembly. That was the provisional government that's put into place, and then the Reichstag, which is the official government that's going to come in. And so I just want you to take a moment here and look at some of these numbers and see what they tell you. See what story do they tell you. So I think some key takeaways here would be that the Social Democrats are the leading party, but there's no majority party. The people are divided. We call this a coalition government. If they want to get anything done, they're going to have to work with other parties. The Communist Party has a good showing, but they are not a majority here. And so what we see happen here is going from the provisional government to the National Assembly to the Reichstag. Germany created a constitutional democratic republic, just like that, in the wake of a lost war. I mean, if you think about what places have had to go through, what France went through to try to get that, what other countries were still struggling for, and it just came so easy. Now, the government of the Reichstag, we call that the Weimar Republic. Everybody repete, s'il vous plaît, Weimar Republic. It's not the Weimar. Don't say Weimar, okay? It's the Weimar Republic, and it's technically only the government for Germany after they create that constitution, but really we just kind of use the Weimar as a generic term for all of the interwar years. And so this was a very mild revolution to democracy. There was no terror, there was no fanaticism, no extremism, no 1789, no 1848, no Peterloo, nothing. They just kind of made this transition. And it was a very modern democracy. They had all the civil rights that you would expect. They had freedom of speech, assembly, religion, vote, universal male suffrage. There was no extremist socialist reforms. They didn't nationalize industry or redistribute land, or no price controls. All of these things that people on the right feared that the left would do if they ever got in control. But then one seemingly useless bit of information that comes into play later: all government workers from the old government stayed in place. So all the civil servants, all the military people, they still stayed in place. And because they were all working for the Kaiser and the Empire before, where in the political spectrum do you suppose those guys were? Yeah, much more to the right than what we see here. So that is technically the end of day one. So you can stop there, and you got a little homework to do. So we'll check you out in the next time you want to come back. Well, we'll talk about German problems. Just remember, kids, make sure you are using your hand sanitizer and washing your hands. It's the best thing you can do to help out the current situation. And of course, our social distancing that we're doing right now. It's gonna be wild. We'll be talking about this for years and years and years, about what we did and our contributions to help halt the spread of this. So today we're going to talk about Germany's 5 big problems, the 5 main problems that Germany had interwar. But one thing I want to make note of is, was World War II inevitable at this point? We finished yesterday with Germany having their mild revolution to democracy. Was World War II inevitable? And I think we'd be in pretty much agreement that no, right now, World War II is not inevitable. But now let's get to some of the issues. So, German problems. The first major problem is the peace terms itself. And we talked about these peace terms extensively. We had a whole day about them and did the stations. What is this cartoon talking about? What is it suggesting about the peace terms? So go ahead and take a second and think about that. And again, I would really encourage you to write things down. Any questions you have, just keep them right on there so that you know what you need to talk about and what we need to talk about. This is a little Austrian pencil there, hue and yodeling. So one of the big problems is the peace terms themselves. They viewed Versailles as a diktat, which is a dictated peace, something that was forced upon them, force-fed, like that picture there. And they saw the Weimar government, fairly or unfairly, as a product of their war defeat and of Versailles. And they're going to be linked together. And I think it's important to remember that Germany never accepted the war guilt clause or its forced borders. Those were forced upon them, and they had to take them. They didn't accept them. They didn't like them. And if accepting democracy equals accepting Versailles, gosh, then democracy is going to be doomed to fail, and Germany is going to have a real hard time separating that association. The next 4 political cartoons and propaganda are all about this idea of the diktat, so we'll look at those and talk through that. So these are 2 postcards. Oh, what's going on? Hold on. Am I gone? Okay, I think I'm gone, but I'm still recording, right? All right, good. Hi. These are 2 postcards that show this idea of the stab in the back myth. And I want you to write that down, stab in the back myth. I think something to keep in mind is this idea of, did Germany lose the war? Were they militarily defeated? And, it's hard to make an argument that they were, but they definitely lost the peace. And so that's what these are going at. So take a moment and talk about, or look at these and think about them and think about the point of view. Go ahead. Come up with something good. I think it's really important, just on a psychological level, if you think about this, if you blame somebody else for a problem that you have or something that happened, how that impacts you moving forward, just on a psychological level, on an emotional level. So this idea of scapegoating, of blame, that we're all too familiar with when we study World War II. So next is a propaganda poster that says "Lost but not forgotten country, not forgotten land," and so this is all the territory uh, that was taken away from Germany after World War One. To make Poland, to make Czechoslovakia, which of course is extremely important, Alsace-Lorraine. They still believe this is theirs. They still want this back, lost but not forgotten. Which we have lost may not truly be lost. I mean, this is very aggressive here. Looking at this next poster, and you can see it on your copy, your handout here. David, the spokesperson, that's David Lloyd George. He says, "Off with the spiked hat. What do you think we fought this war for, if not to abolish militarism?" Meanwhile, they're pointing the large cannon and they have their swords behind their back. And so it's just very hypocritical. This is focusing on de-armament. The de-armament provisions of Versailles and how they forced Germany to accept these ideas. And this is another really cool one. So I want to give you time to think about this one on your own. So look what's going here. Look at the way the characters are, and what does the artist think about the peace terms? What's going on in this one? Go ahead. Okay, I hope you really looked at this one because it's really interesting. So this will make you forget the peace terms. So this is equating Bolshevism to like alcohol, a short-term solution to forget your problems, which doesn't work, children. Don't do it. And giving it to Germany, who looks ragged, who's haggard. But I think it's interesting that the Bolshevik doesn't look much better. He's just as bad as Germany is right now. So it's an interesting perspective. Like, this will help them forget, but maybe not actually help them. I don't know. And this one was actually done, as you can see, March 28th in 1919. So we're 100 years and a couple weeks off of that. All right, so that all has to do with the diktat. That all has to do with our first of 5 problems that we're going to talk about with Germany. The next problem we're going to talk about is the Kapp Putsch of 1920. Putsch is basically the German word for coup, like a coup d'etat. And so this is the Kapp Putsch. Now, we already talked yesterday about the Spartacist Rebellion, and we know the Spartacist Rebellion was a revolution from where on the political spectrum? Yeah, from the left. So it was from the left. This is going to be one from the right. So it's a group of army officers, and they rebel. They come to take in the government, and these are the army officers. Again, they're left over from the empire, left over from the Kaiser, and they force the Weimar to flee. So the government gets out of Dodge. The Weimar is actually saved by appealing to the workers, ironically the left, the general shutdown. So just shut down the city, shut down power, shut down transportation, shut down factories. And the left does, not because they particularly love the Weimar, I suppose, but because these militarists, these military guys, these guys coming in are even further to the right. The workers definitely don't like them. And so the Weimar is saved. So this is not a huge thing, but at the moment it was a pretty big deal. So again, we already had one revolution from the left. Now we're having one from the right. So that's the second problem that Germany's had. The first is diktat. Second is the Kapp Putsch. The third one is how the government must try to rebuild their economy. They totally retooled their economy. Remember, they did war socialism, same as everybody else, and they did it the most because they were so isolated because of the blockade. So they had to rebuild their economy, and this is just a really wild-looking graph. So the red line is the trend that they would have been doing had World War I not happened, but the blue is what actually happened because of the war. But one thing to keep in mind is how much of this war was fought on German soil. Correct, nothing. And so they had very little infrastructure damage. They had to retool their economy, but they didn't have much to actually physically rebuild. Now, the fourth problem that's a big, huge problem that touches on so many different levels is reparations. This is the war guilt clause. This is the idea that it's Germany's fault. They actually did calculations to determine how much this war should cost Germany. down to every life that was lost, every officer, every enlisted man lost wages. I mean, everything. Uh, and the amount that they came up with was 269 billion German gold marks. $64 billion, which I know maybe doesn't sound like a lot to us today when we throw around that, but that today, that would be like somebody saying, Iraq, we helped you out, or Afghanistan, we helped you out. You owe us now a 78 quadrillion, a badillion, bajillion dollars. I mean, this number was comical. It was, it almost even became embarrassing to a point. But this is going to have such huge ramifications. One of the first ramifications was actually in your reading. It's the Ruhr crisis. So many things are related to this. We got to make a whole bunch of connections here. So the U.S. pulls out of the League of Nations. Basically, they don't ratify the Treaty of Versailles. They don't want to be linked into another European war. So they pull out. Now, France was counting on the United States to be in the League of Nations and to ratify the Treaty of Versailles to keep Germany in check. When the U.S. doesn't do that, France wants immediate reassurance that Germany is going to remain weak. So they occupy the Ruhr Valley, which is a mineral and industry-rich region. So this is like repossessing a car if you miss a payment. France wanted to be reassured that Germany wasn't going to be able to rebuild, retool, remilitarize. And so in January of 23, they take the Ruhr Valley. And this is going to set off a whole bunch of different issues. So we're going to look at some different perspectives of the Ruhr crisis here. So go ahead and take a moment and talk with yourself. I keep saying partner. Talk with yourself about these political cartoons and what they represent. By the way, that is a French field marshal's hat, if you're wondering. My favorite part about this actually is, we look at these like the French is just this terrible harpy monster, frightening creature thing. But like, how strong is France actually at this point? Like, we know they're doing this out of a position of weakness. Now, here's a slightly different perspective of the Ruhr. See, now the French cartoon calls it the Ruhr blockade, right? This means here I am, here I stay. The RF stands for the Republic of France, and you can even see keeping, sitting on the mineral goods or coal, keeping them safe from Germany. So another part of the Ruhr crisis. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about this cartoon. This is a pretty good one. So this is German reparation resources, is what it says up there. When she got there, the cupboard was bare. So just kind of a cool perspective here. Once again, still a bonnet rouge. French reconstruction plans on a poodle. So they want their money. France wants their money. Can you see me? I don't know what's going on here. So another item related to the reparations is the Little Entente. Once again, France wants security, so they signed an alliance with Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia to help check German ambitions. Now, Germany wasn't afraid to go to war when there was a strong France and a relatively perception of a strong Russia on its border. Now it's bordered by New Poland, New Austria, which has German sympathies, New Czechoslovakia, and its other allies, I can't help but notice, don't even touch Germany. Okay, let's move on. So all of those are related to the reparations, and that's France's fourth problem. And then the fifth problem that we're going to get to here is inflation. When you combine reparations with the loss of industry from Alsace-Lorraine, from the Ruhr Valley, the only way to solve it and to repay their debts is to print lots of money. And this just gets comically stupid. So at the beginning of the war, it was 4.2 German marks to the US dollars. By the time the war ended, it was 14. A couple years later, it was 76. A couple years later, it was 4.2 trillion marks to $1 US. Trillion marks. Can I move? Did I move? I don't know if that works. So the middle class is just devastated. The middle class is their savings. Any money you have in savings is now worthless. Even if you had $100,000 saved, it's now worthless. It's now worth less than $1. Somebody did calculations for me that $1 would be worth 1/2 of a millionth of a penny. And your reading talked about this, and we can look at some of the currency and stuff. So the money was so worthless. These are bundles of money that kids are using to play with. The money was so worthless, that it was actually more cost efficient to use the money as fuel to burn and heat your house than use it to buy fuel. Courtesy of Mr. Voss, I have some marks here. So this is a 500,000 mark note. 500,000. This is a 1,000 mark note. 10 million mark note. 5 million maybe? 5 million. 20 million mark note. He has the originals. He was nice enough to share copies with me. So really, the end of the day, this inflation just devastates the middle class. Any savings they had, any insurance they had is totally gone. And so now I want you to go through, look at these 5 problems and rate them. Rank them, which you think are, in order, which are the biggest problems. Which is the biggest problem, 1 through 5. Go. What'd you come up with? Which order did you put them in? So even with these problems right now, would you say war is inevitable? I don't think so. I think if anything right now, Germany is too weak to go to war. Are we getting there? I don't know. It's kind of your perspective. So anyway, that is the end of day 2 for this. You've got a couple other things that you can do, we can look at, but that's the end of day 2 for this lecture. So then we got one more day coming up. All right. So now we're on day 3 of this InterWarYears lecture, and we're going to take a look at things that are potentially looking up, things that there's some signs for optimism, of hope here. First one we need to look at is this idea of European debts to the U.S. So all in red are, or pink or salmon, is that maybe perhaps, are nations that are indebted to the U.S. So basically you can see everybody except the Central Powers owes us money, and a couple neutral powers here, okay? And what we see is like France is relying on Germany to pay it back reparations so it can pay the U.S. back. So the U.S. is like, hey, dude, France, like you're looking good, making a good comeback here, man. Like we'd like some money, please. We'd like you to pay us back the money that we loaned you during the war. And France is like, man, dude, I'd love to give it to you, but you know what? Germany owes me some money. So I can't pay you back till Germany pays you back. So sorry, but you'll totally be the first to get it, dude. And so U.S. is like, all right, so if Germany pays you back, you'll pay us back. And France is like, promise, man, you're my guy. And so this is going to lead what's called to the Dawes Plan. So this is the U.S. to the rescue. So this is just a conversation we just had. Europe says they can't repay their loans, the U.S. loans, until Germany pays them their money. So here's what the U.S. does. The U.S. loans money, $2.5 billion, to Germany. Germany can then use that to pay the Allies back $2 billion. The Allies can then use that back to pay $2.6 billion in war debts to the U.S. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying that's a lot of work for just a little bit of money there. Why is the U.S. doing that? I think one of the key things to remember is this word right here. Are they giving this money to Germany? No, they're loaning it. So they're going to charge interest on that, right? They're getting money back in that. Also, as Germany's rebuilding, as the Allies are rebuilding, especially France, U.S. is saying, hey, you know, it'd be awful nice if you used some of our companies here. This is kind of a big deal. Bought some stuff from us. And so this is going to help the U.S. I think another one of the key takeaways from this, and this is something we always say, like after World War I, the U.S. went into their shell and they didn't sign the Treaty of Versailles and they just wanted to be left alone. I don't know. I'd say there's $2.5 billion like reasons, we can demonstrate here that the U.S. is not isolating itself. It's not drawing within its shell. Now, as the part of this deal, the U.S. tells France, you also have to return the Ruhr. We're not going to be loaning this money to Germany if you're going to maintain or retain their most valuable industrial piece. So the Ruhr is returned. So when we combine the Ruhr return and U.S. money, things are starting to look up in Germany a little bit. A next reason for optimism, reason for hope, and I know this is a weird one in hindsight. So basically, Germany and the Soviet Union, they signed a little treaty, a Treaty of Rapallo. This is in 1922, by the way. Now, both of them were left out of Versailles, the new Soviet Union, and then Germany wasn't allowed in here. And so it's them coming together. It's basically about money, workers, trade between the two. But there's a real important thing here. Germany renounced the land claims from the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk to show good faith. So don't forget, at the end so when Russia wanted to get out of the war, they had to give up a whole bunch of land to Germany to get out of the war. But then all of that land didn't go to Germany after the war. So Germany doesn't have it right now anyway, but by saying we don't claim it, it's just kind of a sign of good faith between them and the Soviet Union. And that's going to play a little role when we get into down the road a little bit here. So think of this more as like both Germany and the Soviet Union, who had been international pariahs, outsiders, are now kind of being brought into the fold, at least just with each other. Next, I want to talk about the Kapp Putsch. So this is another revolution attempt, another coup attempt in Germany. It was a failed coup attempt by the Nazis. It was led by Hitler and a popular World War I general, Ludendorff. So again, this is a rebellion from the right. This is a coup attempt from the right. It was poorly planned and executed. It never really had a chance of succeeding. And yes, a pushed attempt is never a good thing. But I think one of the important things to show is that it's failure. It shows both the weakness of the Nazi Party and the relative strength of the Weimar. You know, if we compare this with the Spartacist rebellion or with the Kapp Putsch that we talked about over the last couple days, this just was a dismal failure. And if you ever want to feel a little less scared of the abject evil that is Adolf Hitler, just picture him in short pants. All right, I want to talk a little bit more about this guy. So Hitler wrote a book while he was in jail for the Kapp Putsch called Mein Kampf, which means my struggle. And if you've ever read it, it just reads like one long, angry German rant where he's railing on everything. He actually originally titled it 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. And his publisher was like, whoa, dude, how about we tone it down just a little bit to my struggle? And he's like, 9. Okay. So his 3 key goals and objectives that he lays out in this book are Lebensraum, which is literally translates into living space. He wanted living space for true Germans, and this was going to be to the east of Germany. So that was a territorial goal. So Lebensraum is living space for true Germans, and that was a territorial goal. Second goal is he wanted to restore the German Empire. And his third goal is a Germany for Germans, the only true Germans he saw. No Jews or any other undesirables, as he called them, which would be Slavs specifically. He believed they were a master race. The Germans were a master race. And that's a social or ethnic goal, if you want to consider it that way. And he blamed Jews for all of Germany's problems, for the war loss, for the bad economy, for the weak government, for everything. He blamed the Jews. He said they were an element acting against German interest. And 2 key takeaways, I think, from here. One, this small but influential group of Nazis and Hitler acolytes and whatnot showed once again this anti-Semitism, this underlying anti-Semitism that's present in Germany. So it showed this underlying anti-Semitism. But another part is, where is he writing this book from? Yeah, he's writing this book from jail. He lost. And he's not unique. He's just one of many angry ex-German soldiers who are upset at what's going on. And this book didn't sell at all until he rose in politics. And so it's not like this was a major influence. People are always like, well, why didn't people read his book and then they'd know what he was doing? Nobody read it. This book didn't sell at all until after his rise. So this is just kind of an interesting political cartoon. The Weimar government is represented by a centaur, a husky one at that. I'm not really sure why. But you see it's under attack from the right and from the left. That would be a communist there. Kind of the stereotypical depiction of a Jewish person, the communist star, and then the Nazi swastika. But I want to look at this, and we're going to look at this chart a whole bunch of times, actually. There we go. So look at the Nazi party here. So here's the Communist Party, the KPD. Their seats stay pretty steady, go up a little bit. The majority party, or not majority, but the largest party, the Social Democrats, they even stay pretty even-keeled throughout most of the time. The Nazis, they're a nothing party. They are a minority, a tiny, tiny minority, and in fact, even going down until the Depression. And we'll get there. We're not there yet. The Depression hasn't hit yet. But this is a significant turning point for the Nazis and for Germany. All right, for real, we're back now. All right, so now, again, we're going to talk about a collective security and a hopeful outlook. So again, this is all about optimism right now. So we do get the creation of this League of Nations. Okay, this is after World War I. They wanted a group that could come together and supposed to be a linchpin of peace. The purpose was to prevent wars through collective security and disarmament and settling international disputes through negotiation and arbitration. This is every European's dream. It's a permanent meeting. Like when there's a crisis, they don't even have to call a meeting. They have a meeting right there. The problems with it, though, is it lacked its own armed forces and depended on the great powers to enforce resolutions, to keep economic sanctions or provide an army when it was needed. And the great powers rarely did that. Nobody wanted to get back into another war. Plus, keep in mind, the US, the Soviet Union, and Germany, none of those are in. So they're major players on a world scale, and they're just not allowed in. I should say not allowed. The U.S. chose not to be in. Soviet Union and Germany are not allowed in till later. And so let's take a look at a couple images of the League of Nations, and you've looked at a couple of these. So go ahead and take a look at those, and then we'll chat. So you've looked at a couple of these, but again, it just shows kind of the general weakness of the League of Nations. So now, we look at the Washington Naval Conference. It was called to ease fast rising tensions in the Pacific, both America and Great Britain against a rising Japan. There was another arms race, another battleship race even. And people were like, wait a second, this is what got us to World War I. Let's figure this out. And so they had an arms limitation agreement. This is to demilitarize. This is to literally directly address one of the problems of World War I. It's the first disarmament conference in history where powers are voluntarily saying, we will de-escalate, we will stop building, we will come down. And so the ratio of battleships in the Pacific was the US and Britain, each had 5, which is pretty unheard equality for the US and Britain. I mean, don't forget, this is Britain, more boats. And the US is saying, no, we're on equal terms there. Japan, they say, you can get 3. And Japan's like, but we're the only one who's actually in the Pacific. This is actually our backyard. We're a power here. Why shouldn't we be able to do this? To which the US and Britain are basically like, I don't know if you noticed this, but you're still not white. So Japan is ticked at that. France and Italy both are given a minor presence. And Russia wasn't invited, and that ticked them off because don't forget, they had long wanted to be the master of the East, and they're like, yo, dudes, we're still touched the Pacific too. And the US was like, yeah, and Britain was like, whatever, nah, dog. But if we look at this graph, so this is the years leading up to the arms limitation. I mean, it worked. Like this is Britain was finishing one battleship and they finished. And then nobody did anything until starting to gear up for World War II again. Until we were getting on the eve there. But even then, it's much less than it was before. So again, this worked. And one other thing to point out, The U.S. was in this. They hosted it. They took part in it. So again, this story that the U.S. isolates itself and separates itself from everything after World War I, it doesn't really hold up to me. Next, we have the Maginot Line. Everybody say Maginot. So it's a French defensive line to stop a German advance. It's made to win the ultimate trench warfare. It's a series of bunkers and underground tunnels and barricades, and we'll go back and forth between these two slides, and bunkers and things to slow down soldiers and jeeps and tanks and all kinds of things and cannons, and they're all pointed right at Germany so they can't get in. And the strongest defenses go through Alsace-Lorraine because that's surely where Germany would come. And then they have weaker defenses along the border with Belgium because Germany would never invade the neutral. Anyway, the important part for our conversation about the Maginot Line is it made the French feel more secure. And so it made them open to compromise, willing to work with the Germans. They felt like they had a way to stop the Germans, and what happened in 1914 wasn't going to happen to them again. And so with historical hindsight, we know this thing's a dismal failure and it doesn't work. But at the time, this made things better. Which is going to get us to the Locarno Pact of 1925. It was a series of treaties that marked the high point of peace. Your reading talked about this, the high point of peace and cooperation. They referred to it at the time and later as the spirit of Locarno. People were feeling good. The Europeans were feeling confident. They were moving forward. Basically, they made a whole bunch of agreements about borders and issues that were still disputed after World War I and with the treaty. And Germany is in on this, and they agreed to fix borders and protect borders. And then actually Germany is allowed into the League of Nations because they accepted the borders from Versailles. I think it's worth noting, though, if you see what Kellogg-Briand, who's the French prime minister, still what he has behind his back is waiting. This is going to lead us to the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was also in your reading. 62 nations committed to outlawing aggression and war for settling disputes. They outlawed war. They were so excited and so hopeful for peace moving forward that they outlawed war. But now, how do you enforce no war? Because like if someone goes to war, you can't just be like, hey, don't. But again, it shows the optimism. It's very idyllic, but it's showing the optimism moving forward. This is just kind of an interesting, like, foreshadowing for the future. One of the things that some people had been talking about, Brand of France included, was creating a United States of Europe, kind of a European, I don't know, union, represented by the jumpsuit in the back, when you had to get out of the old ideas between nations. So really a pretty forward-thinking idea, just wasn't quite the time for it. This is a great political cartoon showing a flapper, also, by the way, very 20s thing, which is pretty cool. So what is the artist's point of view about Europe's chances in 1928 when this cartoon was done? Are they going to reach disarmament? Are they going to get to the big next step? This is David Lowe, by the way, British political cartoonist. We'll look at a lot of his stuff, especially in World War II. That's when he was at his best. So go ahead and answer that question. What do you think? What do you think he thinks the chances are? All right, and that brings us to our last point on this slide. There are a lot of good reasons for hope. Germany has a positive outlook at this point. So I'm saying this is 1928, let's call it. The economy is looking up for Germany. They've accepted their borders. They're kind of moving on from World War I, from the anger. Now, there's still obviously underlying issues, but they're moving forward. The world economy is getting back to pre-war levels by 1928. Trade and production is getting back up to pre-war levels. So things are looking up. And it seemed like the long nightmare that was World War I that started in 1914, ended in 19, but really the issues that still been going on, seemed like that was over. It seemed like maybe the world was really made safe for democracy and things were going to be better. And so I think it's really important to understand at this point even, World War II is not inevitable. It's what comes next that's going to get us to that path. So thanks for watching. Enjoy. Hasta la vista.